we're in Numbers 13 through 15. And it's the danger of rejection. Where it starts out is right here in this section. It says, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, send some men on your behalf to investigate the land of Canaan, which I am giving to Bnei Israel. Each man you are to send will be a prince of the tribes of his fathers, a man from each tribe. So according to the word of Adonai, Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All the men were princes of Bnei Israel. Now, what's interesting about this is, some of y'all have maybe seen this before, but some of your versions may read more of a send some men, as if God was telling him to send these men out into the land. But that creates a little bit of a problem, because what we see here in Deuteronomy, when Moses is recounting all of this, and he's relaying it some years later, he makes it sound like it's their idea. He says, see, Adonai your God has set the land before you. Go up, take possession, as Adonai, God of your fathers, has promised you. Do not be afraid or discouraged. But then, after all that was happening, then all of you came near to me and said, let's send men ahead of us to explore the land for us, and bring us back word about the way we should go up and the cities we will enter. The idea seemed good to me, so that I took 12 men from among you, one man from each tribe, and they turned and went up into the hill country. So, while back in the Numbers passage it reads as if it was God's idea, in reality, this was the people's idea, was to send the spies, and God allowed it. When you read it, when you read the verses, when you read the Hebrew of it, it does say it's like a sending for yourself. You do this because this was your idea. Okay, I'm giving you permission. Go do it. Send them up there. Because sometimes, the way human nature works, or sometimes how we are, is that we don't really believe it until we can see it for ourselves. And we have a whole state that's named after that, right? Or the motto for Missouri is the show me state. So you see, y'all know that. So yes, God said it was a good land, but they were already having some trouble believing him sometimes. I mean, they already had a hard time believing his sense of direction, because he was taking them in ways that didn't make sense if this is where we're going, right? So, but what if it's not really as good as God makes it out to be? That's kind of what they're wondering. And sometimes not only do we have to see it for ourselves to believe it, sometimes we think we are too smart for our own good. They wanted to try to figure out the best way to do it. What's the easiest route? What's the likeliest way? What's the most chance of success? We better figure out our tactics before we get there. Otherwise, we're all going to be dead in the first battle. That's how we think about things. So unfortunately, just because we see something, does that mean it's true? Can our eyes deceive us? Yeah, they can. Are we really all that smart sometimes? Do we really always know the best way? Is the best way the most obvious and easiest way? Because, if you're going by the easiest way, what's the first city that they went to attack in the land is Jericho, right? That's one of the strongest cities at the time, with its fortifications and things. That probably would not be the first one I'd want to start with if you were just asking me. I'd want to have a little victory first before I go take on the big one. So we're not always as smart as we think we are. What we think of as good, sometimes he'll see it as not so good. He'll see it as trash. What we think of as good tactics might prevent him from receiving all of the glory. And so he is not really interested in hearing us sing that I did it my way, as Sinatra always put it. He's more interested in hearing us talk about and sing about how we did it his way. That's what he's trying to make us learn, that lesson. So this whole sequence reveals certain things about God. It reveals certain things about the hearts of his people. So some of the things that we learn is that the land really is good. God's word can be taken and believed. The land is really good. Numbers chapter 13, verse 27. It says this, as they come back, they gave their account to him, to Moses. It says, we went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey. And this is some of its fruit. Y'all have seen some of they were carrying the grapevines or the grape clusters back with them. And how many men did it take to carry it? It took 2. And I've seen some of the pictures of what people think it was look like or whatever else. And there are clusters of grapes that are bigger than we are. And it's just an amazing thing. So the land is good. They say it again in verse 27. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, they tore their clothes. They said to the whole assembly of Bnei Israel, the land through which we passed, it's not just good, it's not just okay, it's not all right and we'll figure it out. It's exceptionally, exceedingly good. It's a good land. If Adonai is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land and will give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So this land is good. It's beyond their expectations. It's all types of terrain they're going to find, all types of opportunities to make a living. The land will provide abundance. The land is going to provide variety. What they're looking for is all going to be there. What God wants to provide is all going to be there. But the problem is, this is one of those examples when the majority is not always right. That's one of my fears and concerns in today's political culture, with everybody keeps saying that we are a democracy, right? Haven't y'all been hearing that a lot lately? Are we really? No, we're not. We're a constitutional representative republic. Right? There are things that are to protect the minority against the will of the majority. So a straight, pure democracy of majority rule is a dangerous thing if you're not in the majority. And so this is one of those examples where the majority is not always right. 10 of the spies said we can't go. 2 of the spies said that we could. And which one was correct? The 10 or the 2? The 2. 2 were correct. But in this whole situation, what we've got to realize is that by rejecting the land, the people and the spies and everybody, they were rejecting God. Because they refused to go in, because they were rejecting what was right before them, what God had prepared for them, even though the people were afraid of them. Even 40 years later, by rejecting the land, they were rejecting God. They were essentially treating God with contempt. That's what he talks about in chapter 14, verse 10. It says, then the glory of Adonai appeared at the tent of meeting to all Bnei Israel. And Adonai said to Moses, how long will these people treat me contemptibly? And when you look at that word, it's a verb which means to spurn, to despise, or abhor. It's even translated as to blaspheme, to speak evil of in other places. So that is not a pleasant word. That is not an easy word. This is how God feels about what they are doing and what they are saying. Does he take it seriously? Yes. Is he insulted by what they have said about the land, about what he has prepared for them? Yes, he is insulted about that. He is offended by that. Can our words offend God? Yes. Can our actions offend God? Yes, they can. Even when we think we're doing it right, even when we think we're doing it in our own best interest, God can still very much be offended by that. And so by rejecting the land, they are treating him with contempt, but they also are showing and proving that they don't really trust him. That same passage goes on. How long will these people treat me contemptibly? How long will they neglect to trust in me? How long will they neglect to trust? And again, this is the word aman. It means to support or confirm, to be faithful, to uphold or nourish. How long are you not going to confirm what I say to you, believe what I say, stand in what I say, to be certain of what I say? It's talked about believing, being faithful, to be sure, or to establish. How long are you not going to take this seriously, what I say, and believe me? So they were treating God with contempt. They were showing they didn't really trust Him. They were also showing they didn't even trust their own eyes. Remember, that's why they wanted to send the spies in the first place, is they wanted to see it for themselves, and yet they didn't really trust their eyes with everything they'd already seen. So how long will these people treat me contemptibly? How long will they neglect to trust in me in spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them? Did they see a lot of things? They've seen a lot of things that we haven't seen. They've seen a whole lot of things that we haven't seen. And did the fact that they saw all these miracles, did it make their faith any stronger? No, it really didn't. That's why Yeshua talks about, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. See, that's pretty much where we are on so much of this, believing what the Scriptures have to say. We weren't there to see it. It's not recorded on TV for us to rewind and watch. All right? And yet, we believe it. All right? They didn't even really believe their own eyes. They didn't believe the miracles that were right in front of them. By rejecting the land, they are rejecting God. They're treating Him with contempt. They're not trusting Him. They're not believing the miracles they had seen. And in a lot of ways, they almost made God into a weakling and a liar. That's the way Moses responds when God, in his offense, says, look, I'm just going to wipe them out. I'm going to start over with you. When Moses responds to him, he says, look, if you kill these people all at once, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, because Adonai was unable to bring this people to the land He had promised them, He has slaughtered them in the wilderness. So, yeah, he just couldn't pull it off. He's not strong enough. He's not powerful enough. Yeah, he did some things to Egypt, but that really kind of took too much out of him. He really couldn't do what he said he was going to do. He really couldn't fulfill the promises that he said he was going to do. So by rejecting the land, they were profaning His name and making Him look bad. They treated Him with contempt. They didn't trust Him. They didn't believe the miracles. They almost made a liar out of Him. And because of that, the consequences, the generation that rejected God and the land are not going to enter it. They're not going to be able to see and experience the land and the blessing for what God had prepared for them. He says in chapter 14, verse 21, he says, but as certainly as I live, and as certainly as the glory of Adonai fills the entire earth, none of the people who saw my glory and my miraculous signs and performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet tested me these 10 times and did not obey my voice. Not one of them will see the land I promised to their forefathers. None of those who treated me with contempt will see it. So there are consequences for rejecting the land, because ultimately they are rejecting Him and their walk with Him and their relationship with Him. It goes on in chapter 14, verse 29. He says, in this very wilderness your bodies will drop, every one of you, 20 years of age and older, who was numbered in the census and grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land about which I lifted my hand to make home for you, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. As for your children, whom you said would be like plunder, well, I will bring them in, and they will experience the land that you spurned. So the children that you were doing it all for the children, they're the ones that are going to be able to, they're going to have to suffer for 40 years out in the wilderness to a degree, but they're the ones that are going to get to see the fulfillment of the promise. He says, but your bodies will drop in this wilderness. Your children will be herdsmen in the wilderness for 40 years. They will suffer because of your unfaithfulness until your corpses are consumed in the wilderness. For 40 years, corresponding to the number of the 40 days you explored the land, 1 year for each day, you will suffer for your iniquities and know my hostility. This is not a pleasant moment. God truly does feel offended. God truly does feel rejected because they are not believing in his promise. And then look at some of these things in chapter 15. This is the life that they're going to miss. The life that they're going to miss out on because of this moment. Not only are they going to be experiencing the downside of dying out in the wilderness, but they're also going to miss some of the blessing. It says again, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Bnei Israel and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, where you are to make your homes, and you are presenting a fire offering to Adonai, a burnt offering or a sacrifice to mark fulfilling a vow, a free will offering, or during a Moedim." All right, just stop there for a second. What are they going to be able to have in the land based on this verse? Well, it's a land that they'll be given. They're going to be able to make a home, right? They're going to be able to present a fire offering. They're going to be able to do a burnt offering, sacrifices, make vows, all those types of things, all right? The life that they're going to miss, you've got to realize that when he is talking about this future, he's no longer talking to the generation that's going to die in the wilderness. He's talking to that younger generation that's going to go in. He's telling them, guys, this is what you're going to benefit from. This is what you're going to experience. He's speaking to that younger generation, the one who will actually go into the land. They are going to be able to have a home, but they're also going to be free to worship. They're going to have the offerings. They're going to have the Moedim, and they're only going to be able to experience all of that through the victory that he is going to provide. I mean, they're not going to be able to make their offerings and their vows and worship and do all of those things if they're losing. They're only going to be able to experience that. They're only going to be able to make their homes through victory. So he's telling them 40 years in advance, this is what you younger generation, this is what you're going to experience. You're going to experience what they are going to miss out on. In the land, these are some of the things. In the land, it's when they get there, when they begin to experience the victory, then they'll be receiving their inheritance. Okay? It's when they get there, that's when they'll be able to see the fulfillment of promise. And even this, receiving their inheritance, is a picture, it's a mirror, it's a showing of the inheritance that is to come, that Peter even talks about in chapter 1 of 1 Peter. You're going to be receiving an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, which is reserved or kept in heaven for you. All right? It can never perish, which means that it's not going to die. Right? It's not going to be something that, like livestock, that can be wiped out in a flood. It's not going to perish, spoil, which means it's not like it's food or fruit or a harvest that can go bad and get fungus on it or whatever else like that. And then the inheritance is not going to fade, which means it's never going to lose its beauty or its luster. That's the kind of inheritance that we are going to receive in Messiah. And this is just the beginning of it. This is just the beginning of the seeing of that promise being fulfilled. In the land, they're going to be shown the place where his name is going to dwell. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 12, where, and of course, we know that is the city of Jerusalem. That's where they'll be able to bring their sacrifices. That's where they'll be able to bring their offerings, is to the temple of God. In the land, they're no longer going to have to wander around or live in tents, but they're going to be able to make their home. They're going to be able to have a place of what's supposed to be a permanent place. A place that they're never going to lose. A place that will always be theirs. And in the land, they can truly be a light to the nations. Once they've got that fixed point, once they've got the place where his name dwells, they can truly be the magnet to the nation that they're supposed to be. Because life in the land should draw them. Life in the land should pull the nations to them for what they are seeing. We see that in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 6. He says, you must keep and do them. This is the Torah. This is the commands of God. Keep and do them, this law that he has. For it is your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the peoples, who will hear all of these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has God so near them as Adonai our God is whenever we call on Him? What great nation is there that has statutes and ordinances that are righteous, like all of this Torah that I'm setting before you today? That is supposed to be something that shines forth, as we were singing about just a little earlier, about going up to the mountain. Life in the land is going to be governed by His commands, by His Torah, by His law. That's what life in the land is going to look like. And this life in the land is a reflection, it's a shadow of life in the kingdom, of what that's supposed to look like. It's a life in the millennium. This is a glimpse of what it's supposed to be. A people who are ruled by that. That's what we were singing about earlier. It will come to pass in these last days that the mountain of Adonai's house will stand firm as head of the mountains and will be exalted above the hills. And so, they're going to be a magnet to the nations. All nations will flow to it. Then many peoples will go and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of Adonai, to the house of the God of Jacob. Then He will teach us His ways, and we will walk in His paths." This is the nations that are saying that. Come, let us go there, because we want to be taught His ways. Come, let us go there, because we will want to walk in His paths. Are we not starting to see that more and more? For Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of Adonai from Jerusalem. And He will judge between the nations, and decide for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning knives. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore. The only way that all of these nations are suddenly going to be getting along is because they are under the rule of the true king. And they are being taught His ways, and they are walking in His paths. And when we were truly living like that, then we will know what peace really is. We will know what shalom really is. See, life in the land, what we've got to understand, life in the land is the goal. This is a picture of the goal of what the ideal life for the people of God is supposed to be. That's what life in the land is supposed to be. It's a picture, like I said, of the kingdom of God. It's a picture of the millennial reign of God. And the life in the land is ruled by the King of Kings and the King's laws. It's not just ruling by the king, but it's also the enforcement of and the ruling of His Torah. Because the Torah in the kingdom or in the land is the ideal for how the people of God should live. And it's also a picture of how the people should live wherever they are. Because where is the kingdom now? It's amongst us. It's within us. Right? This is the life. Life in the land is the life that we should strive to live every day. That's who we are. That's who we should be. Because the Torah, wherever we are, is here within us. And the reason why we should live by life in the land, life by His kingdom, life by His Torah, is because this world is not our home. Right? We don't really belong here. We don't really belong to this nation. We are ambassadors for another nation. And the thing is we cannot adopt the ways of our host nation and still expect to be accurately reflecting the king and his kingdom. If we look and live just like everybody else where we live, then we don't accurately reflect the king whom we serve. And so we should live and strive to live by what the land looks like, what the life in the kingdom looks like. When we as the people of God, and this is something that we've been taught for centuries, when we as the people of God reject the Torah and the way of life God lays down for living in the land, and for whatever reason we do that, we are no different than the spies that have rejected the land all the way back then. We are no different from them. The people of God have to choose this day whom you're going to serve and how they will live, because isn't this where we're headed? Isn't this where He's taking us? He is taking us to the land, toward life in the land, toward life in the kingdom, toward the millennial reign of Christ. And so when some in the Jewish world say that only some laws should apply to the Gentiles, like the Noahide laws, if you've heard some of that discussion going on, when they say that, they are essentially rejecting the outsider or the Gentile from being a full member of the nation and the household of God, as if Messiah does not bring the Gentile in and bring us near and make us members of God's household. That's Ephesians 2 and 3. But when the Gentiles turn around and say essentially the same thing, that the Torah is only for the Jews, they are also rejecting their citizenship. They're rejecting their full inclusion. Both are thus rejecting the same truth, that God makes all who unite with Him into one family. He makes us all into one people. That's who He is striving us to be. And here's one of the other things that we struggle with is, Gentiles do not have to become Jews. We don't have to identify as a physical descendant of Abraham to have a place among the tribes. This is one of my criticisms and one of my frustrations with the two-house movement, is that it implicitly suggests that you're not going to be interested in this stuff. You're not going to be drawn to this stuff. You don't have a place to live by His Torah unless you happen to be secretly one of these descendants of Israel. But I don't think that's right. We, Jew and Gentile, should be drawn to this because the nations will be taught it. The nations will be wanting to walk in His ways. So we don't have to be Jewish to want to live this way. And actually, Joshua and Caleb are perfect examples of that. Because Joshua, he has a strong Jewish background and heritage. We know who his family is. We know his tribe and all that kind of stuff. Caleb, however, is not. He is not Jewish. He is a Gentile. He is a Kenizzite, which we read in Numbers 32. This is a recount of all of these events. It says, the men who came out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward will not see the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they have not followed after me with a whole heart, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they were wholehearted after Adonai. Now, Kenizzites are listed in Genesis 15. Verse 18 through 21, as they are inhabitants of the land, independent of Abraham, but they are in the land that Abraham has given. So they are a separate people already. But I want you to notice something. So Caleb is a Kenizzite, but he is also a leader among one of the tribes. The tribe of Judah. Right? So he is welcomed and accepted and given a place. In fact, as some people debate whether Gentiles even have an inheritance or a place in the land, all that kind of stuff, Caleb is given an inheritance in the land. In Joshua chapter 14, in that sequence where he says, give me the high country. It says, so Joshua blessed him, and he assigned Hebron to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, as his portion. He is receiving this Kenizzite, this Gentile, who has been welcomed in and brought in, has been given an inheritance in the land. It says, therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he followed Adonai, the God of Israel, fully. Now, what's amazing about this is, what's the significance of Hebron? Who is buried there?
The patriarchs.
All of them. The quintessential Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their wives, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, and then they say traditionally, who else? They'll say traditionally Adam and Eve are buried there. But we know those guys, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, they are buried in Hebron. And whose charge is over Hebron? A non-Jew. by heritage. Is he considered a Jew? Really, by this point? Yeah, pretty much. He's one of them.
Grafted in.
He is grafted in, absolutely. All right? So he is included in the inheritance because he has chosen to live and connect himself not only to the Jewish people, but to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their God would be his God. Their way of life is going to be his way of life. And all those who join themselves to Israel are called to live by the king's law as they would live in the land. That's the thing. Everybody is called to live by the law of the land, by the law of the king. We see that in chapter 15. In talking about those sacrifices, and talking about those offerings, and all the rules and things that go along with it, he says, everyone native born is to do these things like so when bringing a fire offering as a pleasant aroma to Adonai. Whenever an outsider resides among you, somebody like Caleb, or whoever is among you for generations to come, and he is to present a fire offering as a fragrant aroma to Adonai as you do, he must do exactly the same as you are doing. So this, an outsider is allowed to worship and present offerings. Okay, it says the community will have the same rule for you as well as for the resident outsider. It will be a lasting statute throughout your generations. And as for you, so for the outsider will it be before Adonai. The same Torah and the same regulations will apply to both you and the outsider residing among you. That is an astounding statement. Because most countries and nations and peoples would not have anything like this. You would always be a second-class citizen. There would always be laws that favor the ruling class or the special people group. You know, when you look at that word outsider or alien, it's the word ger, which means a temporary inhabitant, but also I thought this was interesting, a newcomer who lacks inherited rights. A newcomer who lacks inherited rights. Is that Caleb anymore? No, because he's given inherited rights when he comes in, and we see that play out. We see that happen. It comes from a Hebrew word. The Strong's number is 1481, which just happens to be the very next word, the one who sojourns, the alien, the outsider who sojourns among you. That word is gur, or gor. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it. But that means to sojourn, abide, dwell, or dwell in, or dwell with. So it's the two words almost back to back. One is the noun and one is the verb, kind of a thing. So somebody who seeks hospitality with, or to one who assembles oneself with another group. To turn aside from the road is kind of what the foundation of the word is. To turn aside from the road for lodging or for some other purpose. And so it has that picture of you're wandering down, you're going down your own path, and you stop searching. You stop going down a different way in order to find hospitality with somebody else, to assemble yourself with, or join with, to find a place to rest, to call home, or to find a new path, a new way to live. That's the kind of picture that this word has with it. And they are people that are among you. Tavek, it means in the midst or in the middle of, among them. It's from an unused root to sever or cut off. Maybe cutting off from your old life or identity. And I was even wondering if this was some of the language that could be used of the grafting process or the circumcision process. That they are cutting themselves off from the path and the way they used to live, and they are coming among them, in the midst of them, otherwise. But notice that the same Torah applies to Jews, people like Joshua, and the same Torah applies to outsiders and Gentiles like Caleb. And we even see in chapter 15 that the benefits of this Torah apply to both. All right, look over in verse 25. This is in talking about the issue of sins and unintentional sins, and what do we do in those circumstances? It says, so the Cohen will make atonement for the entire community of Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, and they will be forgiven. For it was unintentional, and they brought a fire offering and their sin offering to Adonai for that error. They went through the process. They did the rules of what they're supposed to do when they commit these unintentional sins as the people, as the whole group. So, he says in verse 26, the whole community of Bnei Israel, along with the outsider residing among them, will be forgiven. If they're not being included at all, if they're being counted completely something separate and not a part of them, then why would they be included in the atonement that's provided? For all the people were involved, you all did wrong, and you're all going to be forgiven through the same process. We even see in verse 30 that the punishment for breaking the Torah applies to both. It says, the person who sins defiantly, whether they are native or whether they are an outsider, whether they are rebellious in that sense, where they reviles Adonai, and that person is to be cut off from his people because he has despised the word of Adonai and has broken his commandment, that person will certainly be cut off. His guilt will remain on him. So, if you're a native, you're expected to live a certain way. If you're an outsider who has joined yourself to them, you're expected to live a certain way. And if you don't, you can be cut off. The same rule applies. If you broke, the punishment for breaking the Torah is the same and applied to both. And so just in case anyone missed it or doesn't yet understand, the scripture says it again, whether a native born of Bnei Israel or an outsider living among them, one Torah applies to you for the one sinning unintentionally. It's the same thing, applies to you both. One Torah, and is it one Torah really? Is it really only for this one issue of the unintentional sins? No, it's bigger than that. In other words, there's not going to be favorites. There's not going to be exceptions. There's not going to be classes in the kingdom of God and in the land. All right? There's not going to be two standards of justice and judgment, where if you're in the protected class, then nothing ever happens to you. You're not going to get off the hook. What's one of our problems that we see in the nation today? That justice is not being meted out fairly or consistently. If you know the right people, then you can almost get away with murder. A double standard, and they get away with it, right? Whereas others, they do next to nothing, and then they get the full weight of the law thrown on them, right? So we are seeing and still struggling with the fact that we have two standards of justice. But in the land, in the kingdom, in the millennial reign of the Messiah, there's not going to be two standards of justice and judgment. It's going to be the same. There's also, because of that, in light of that, with the whole concept of the atonement, there's no two ways of forgiveness and atonement. It's the same way. You come and do it this way, or you won't find that forgiveness. You won't find that atonement. So that means, by that reasoning, there is no two ways of salvation for the Jew, and there's a second way of salvation for the Gentile. There are people out there that teach that the Jews have one path for salvation, Gentiles have a different path, and that's not the case. Because it is the same. We must come to God, come to our relationship with the Father the same way and the same provision that He provides, and that is Messiah Yeshua. You've got to come the same way. Because the truth of it is, this is all among the people of God because we are all family. We are all one people. That's what Galatians says. That's what Paul says in Galatians. For you are all sons of God through trusting in Messiah Yeshua. That's the foundation. That's the basis. You trust in Messiah, in the provision of God. He says, for all of you, and that's Jew and Gentile, who were immersed in Messiah, have clothed yourselves with Messiah. So there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free, classes, right? There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Messiah Yeshua. You are all saved exactly the same way. And if you belong to Messiah, whether you are Jew or Greek or any of those things, then you are Abraham's seed. And you are heirs according to the promise. Whether you are Joshua or whether you are Caleb, you are considered Abraham's seed. And you have a place and you have an inheritance for that. See, the ideal of the land, the ideal of the kingdom, the ideal of the millennium is that the Torah of the king will rule both Jew and Gentile and be the standard by which all people live. So we must not fall for the traditions of men that come from either side, both Jew and Gentile, that say these are not for you or not for everybody. Right? For the Jews, they say it's us only. Gentiles will turn around and say it's them only. Both of those positions are wrong. All right? When you say the Noahide only, that's basically stating that you're not fully included. You're kind of with us, but not really. And we're going to make you a second class. When we say things like grace only, hear that a lot. We try to make the Torah a salvation issue rather than a discipleship issue, and it's not. It's always been a discipleship issue. And by saying grace only, that we don't want the Torah of God, we're basically saying we don't want to be really fully included, and we really don't want to live under the king's law. That's a dangerous place to be in, because you can be cut off from that when you're rejecting all of that. Instead, if you don't, what he says in Ephesians chapter 4, again, this is Paul talking. He says, therefore I, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you are called. Now, who defines walking in a manner worthy? He does. And what's the standard? It's his Torah. That's what the whole thing in Isaiah 2 was about. He will teach us his ways and walk in his paths. All right? That's what that's all about. He says, with complete humility and gentleness, with patience, putting up with one another in love. Why do we need to put up with each other? Because some of y'all, not me, but some of y'all have problems.
You don't have flesh.
Yeah.
Amen.
Because not all of us walk this path perfectly, do we? We still need atonement. We still need forgiveness for the unintentional things that we do. Because usually when we offend each other, hopefully we're not doing it on purpose. Sometimes people do it on purpose. And do we still need forgiveness for that? Do we still need all of that? Yes, we do. We need to put up with each other in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Ruach in the bond of shalom, in the bond of peace. Because remember, what did Isaiah say? If we are truly being taught his ways and we are truly walking in his paths, what can the nations do to all of their weapons? Beat them into plowshares. Is that true just of nations, or should that also be true of us? Okay, the ideal of the land, the ideal of the kingdom is all of that. He says there is how many bodies? One, not two. One body and one spirit. Just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one immersions, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. That's who we are supposed to be. This is what life in the land is supposed to look like. This is what life in the kingdom is going to look like. Life in the millennium is going to look like. It's going to be ruled by the king and by the king's Torah. And everybody will be living by it and living under it. So we must not be like the generation that rejected the land, thus rejecting him. And by rejecting his Torah, we are rejecting the life of the kingdom and what life in the land is supposed to look like. So do we really want to live there, is the question that we have to ask. that all of us have to ask. Do we really want to live in the land? Do we really want to be governed by the king? Do we really want to be governed and live by the king's Torah that goes out to the nations? Because Israel is a glimpse of the kingdom. Israel in the land is that glimpse of the kingdom. Are we one people? Are we one family? Or are we not? Are we going to try to live in separate households? That's not who he's making us to be. That's not who he wants us to be. Father, I just pray that we would not reject your land. I pray that we would not reject your kingdom, your Torah, or most of all you. And Father, may we all find our place, our blessing, our inheritance in your land, in your kingdom. Lord, all of these issues, even as they were dealing with them in the first century, at the coming of Messiah, Lord, we are really still dealing with the same ones today. And Lord, I think we understand it even less. So Father, just may you work and continue to move. I thank you, Lord God, that we are beginning to see the fruit of your people returning not only to your land physically, but also to the King, to your Torah, to your ways, both Jew and Gentile, coming and desiring to live as citizens of your kingdom. May that truly be our hearts, and may we truly be a part of seeing this life in the kingdom, life in the land come to pass in our day. In the name of Yeshua.